We are full, right?
Okay, great. We are good. Okay, great.
Just stay around.
Want to welcome everybody to the sixth meeting of the Morrissey Commission. My name is Ethan Britland. I'm the project manager for Massachusetts Department of Transportation for the planning study that is informing the commission. I want to actually thank the Boston Collegiate Charter School for hosting us again. They've been very gracious. And so that said, move right along. I want to advance the slide, please. It's like,
Can't talk, what?
have to go through some meeting notes and procedures. This virtual public meeting will be recorded. Technically, it's a hybrid. The Massachusetts Department of Transportation may choose to retain and distribute the video, still images, audio, and/or chat transcript. By continuing attendance with this virtual public meeting, you are consenting to participate in a recorded event. All recordings and chat transcript will be considered a public record. If you're not comfortable being recorded, please turn off your camera, keep your microphone muted, and refrain from chatting in the transcript box. Otherwise, you may choose to excuse yourself from the meeting. Important notes, your microphone and webcam are automatically disabled upon entering the meeting. The meeting will be open to questions and answers at the end of the presentation. All questions and comments are welcome and appreciated. However, we do request that you refrain from any disrespectful comments. Next slide, please. These are our Zoom controls for those online. Drop-down menu to check microphone and speakers is the speaker icon. If you'd like to ask a question or share comments, use the icon to the left. Raise your hand is the hand icon, and if you're unable to access, please call the phone number with the ID listed. Closed caption automatically generated by Zoom. So with that said, transition to next slide. So here's our agenda for tonight. First, we're going to call the meeting to order by the commission, an introduction of the commission members, and then we'll present on the study work completed to date. We also include a review of our previous feedback, which we'll talk a little about, updates on any short-term improvements in what we call relevant efforts. Excuse me. And then we are going to cover what are called our quarter layouts, and it's what's on the wall over there to my left, your right. And then we get into our alternatives analysis, and this is our sort of initial preliminary draft to seek feedback, and then we'll open it up to commission discussion, public comment, and then talk about what we're going to be doing for next steps. So with that said, gotcha. Thank you. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to David Moeller, who is the designee for the Secretary of Transportation Chair.
Thank you, Ethan. Hello, everyone. I'm David Moeller. I'm Director of Planning at MassDOT. I also serve as the Secretariat Climate Officer. I'm chairing today on behalf of Secretary Monica Tibbetts-Nutt, and we're now going to introduce ourselves, starting with Jim Fitzgerald to my left.
Thank you, David. My name is Jim Fitzgerald. I'm the Deputy Director of Planning Review with the Boston Planning Department, filling in for our Interim Director, Devin Quirk, today.
Chris Osgood, City of Boston, Office of Climate Resilience.
John, Jim's cousin. Brian Arrigo from the Department of Conservation and Recreation.
Jake Walkman, the designee for Senator Collins and a community member in Savin Hill.
Frank Baker, I'm the appointee for David Beal and also a resident.
Thank you all. And I believe Representative Hunt is going to join us virtually. He is stuck in traffic, so I don't think he's online yet, but he is going to be joining us as soon as he gets the chance.
Correct.
Ethan, when you're ready.
Thank you, David. So we'd like to include this reminder of the Commission's goals for those that have been involved in our meetings, but also for anyone just engaging with us now. And primarily focusing on mobility for all users, strengthening climate resiliency in the corridor. We want to develop a comprehensive plan, and we have design concept alternatives here on our screen as well as to our right today. And ultimately, part of the commission's goals are to identify short-term improvements for the corridor in addition to a long-term comprehensive plan. This disclaimer is meant to convey that our conceptual study it has a larger study area than the commission's geography. But what we want to point out here is that for sort of regional context, we don't like to look at a larger area than just a specific corridor for effects, benefits, impacts, things like that. So this is just to remind people that while the Morrissey Boulevard has a specific commission, has a specific charge, the study process itself is separate, but informing the commission, and we just look at a larger area. So now I'm going to transition into our presentation portion of the study. We like to lead with a review of the feedback received. One is a refresher, as this helps guide how we conduct our process, our study work, but also we want people to understand that we are listening to them and it's being incorporated into the process. So this is some people that have been with us before have seen this slide. It's meant to show, again, what we've been hearing throughout the process from the beginning. And we've heard a lot about update on short-term improvements and sort of adjacent, we call them irrelevant projects, concerns about what would happen in changing the cross-section relative to capacity. We've heard a lot about a need for improving active transportation modes and access, environmental, noise, pollution, visual, climate resiliency. And we've heard a lot about U-turns at being Cooley. So when we talk about our updates on short-term and relevant projects, a lot of what we talk about are immediate things that we can do, because when we're looking at a long-term solution, a lot of the shorter-term stuff, if you were to go through project development, it might take just as long. So we try to identify immediate improvements as much as possible. So that's really what we're going to be looking at in terms of short-term. And so transitioning to just sort of setting the table for what our meeting today is going to be, but also how we're going to go from this meeting to the end of our process. And so for today's meeting, we're going to, again, talk a bit about short-term improvements, relevant projects, but primarily we're going to look at the initial alternatives analysis. So we're calling it initial preliminary. It's not complete, but we want to bring it to the public, commission members to present and hear feedback. And we also environmental considerations in terms of the analysis. And then sort of after this meeting, we have a follow-on meeting where we take feedback, we complete our analysis, and we bring back the final analysis. And with that final analysis, we're able to look at what our findings are, potential recommendations, depending on how the remainder of the public process goes. And then our sort of final step or final steps is to sort of have some type of packaged final report, and that can be submitted to the legislature per the commission's charge. So this slide, this is from the city's JFK Station UMass Station Area Access Plan update. So the city's conducting a study of the area around the JFK UMass Station and how to improve access to it, but it's also sort of incorporating the MBTA station redesign, Mount Vernon Street. So the city is separately, but understanding that it ultimately needs to be coordinated as part of any project development. The city is conducting this, and they have an open house October 9th. They have a virtual public meeting on the 16th. And so, and we include these because we understand that while they're separate processes, they certainly need to be connected, coordinated, and ultimately, as part of project development, all need to work together. So part of our study process is to track and keep track, coordinate, but also document, so that as anything moves forward, all of these different relevant projects are in the same mix so that it can be done comprehensively. So this slide is MassDOT updates. We've understandably been hearing a lot about the Case Circle Columbia Road interchange. So as far as an update for this project, they are conducting a lot of the background work, survey, data collection, concepts. They are looking at winter, so end of this year into early next year, to present what they've done to date for work. So essentially they'll be coming out to the public in this way and presenting information, taking feedback. And so they're obviously, we've been saying, in a project development process. So they're ahead of where we are. And so they have their own project development process as a very required way to go and do things, go out to the public, certain design phases. So they do have steps they have to take. So they are doing all this backup work before they come to the public in general and speak to them. And the Beads Bridge is similar. It is in a preliminary concept design phase, but unlike Case Circle Columbia Road, we do include beads in our concepts, and we are going to inform the beads process in the future. From the DCR side, so some of this work was already underway, but some of it has been in response to public comments we've received from either by email or people coming to the meetings. And so DCR has resurfaced the Morrissey Service Road from Old Colony to Bean Cooley. That was completed. You'd probably see that out there now. Sidewalk restoration, wheelchair ramp reconstruction from the old South Line Globe to Malibu Beach. That again is sort of ongoing and should be completed in the fall. Preble Circle pedestrian accessibility improvements at Old Colony Columbia. That's in the fall. And interestingly, DCR has an invasive species management contract. So as throughout the area, if there are invasive species, which can be very damaging. And in fact, at the last meeting, a gentleman came up to the person that was attending from DCR, Rob, and mentioned that there was an invasive species at one of these locations. So he reached right out and addressed it. So this is so again, we understand that a lot of our process here is going to take time. So we really try to identify immediate things that can be done, often in response to what we hear at these meetings. So this is a very standard part of our process. Now, this is another DCR project. It's they're looking at a pump station, and obviously to prevent flooding on Morrissey from Conley to Macomb to Marketplace. So there's an existing drainage outfall pipe. This emergency pumping is required, and so this pump station is going to help with flooding throughout the area in 2024 and 2025. They'll look to complete it. So this hopefully will do a lot for the flooding in the short and medium term. Okay, so that was sort of just an update on the immediate and relevant projects going on in the area. This next part of the presentation, we're calling it the quarter layouts. And this next part is primarily based on our alternatives development process, but wrapped around it is this public involvement process that we've been conducting from the beginning. So these layouts that we've developed are sort of study process, but also public feedback wrapped around it. So we had been showing in prior meetings the individualized locations, but this part of our presentation is going to be stitching together those locations that we showed before in a more cohesive corridor. Again, if you had seen them on the wall to my left and your right, that's what we are going to be showing in pieces again, because it's too long to show in an entire slide. So here's our overview of the corridor very quickly. The intersections are obviously the ones we focus on from the beginning because they are the sort of conflict points, the friction points, the turning movement points. And so we developed a layout based on our process, but also feedback that has one option for Neponset Circle. We have two options for Freeport Street, one for Bean Cooley, two for First Street, and one for Preble. And that's not to say we didn't develop more alternatives, and there's the alternatives are in the evaluation, but given putting together a layout like this, we wanted to sort of pick and choose a few of them just to be able to lay out the corridor in this way. And we also obviously dealt with coastal resiliency. There's some insets related to that. And again, all this was based on feedback from the public. Okay, Casey has arrived. I'm going to transition to Casey Harden from our team. He is going to walk through the layout slides and in a bit more detail. Great, thank you. Bean Cooley is at UMass. It's the intersection at UMass. It's been like that for as long as.
Thanks, Ethan. Thanks, Ethan. We're going to start here. Sorry, Ethan, which way's forward? We're going to start for once at the southern end of the corridor, recognizing the last couple times we've tried from the north and haven't gotten past Bean Cooley. So we wanted to start at Neponset, which is the southern terminus of the project area, a very complex intersection. It's really a combination of 4 or 5 or 6. What we wanted to highlight here, you'll see an orange transparent rectangle. And just to orient everyone, north's to the right. It's going to be to the right on this whole sequence of maps. So, and we're across the left there, that's Neponset Avenue. And then so Morrissey Boulevard continues off to the north towards our right. So I want to draw your attention to that orange area. That orange area is a big contributor to the congestion Neponset Circle experiences, as well as crash incidences, due to the fact that it has so many different movements all coming together and weaving apart. And I'll just step away from the mic for a second just to illustrate some of those. So, hold that. Get on the heavily traveled 93 northbound on-ramp. Sorry. So we have people that are coming northbound or from Neponset Avenue trying to get to the heavily traveled I-93 northbound on-ramp. At the same time, we have people coming from Quincy, Neponset, trying to get north on Morrissey Boulevard. It creates a real mess. So our idea here is to convert Neponset Avenue to two-way. That essentially means that drivers that would have had to go all the way around just to keep going due north on Neponset Avenue or to get going westbound on Gallivan Boulevard would just simply be able to go straight and make those specific maneuvers. I have a laser pointer. And so that is the fundamental traffic engineering aspect to what we're proposing at Neponset Circle. But we also recognize that the Neponset Circle area is not the most welcoming entrance to Dorchester from the south. It could certainly use some placemaking, stormwater resiliency benefits. So we see, in addition to these important traffic improvements, an important need to make sure that the pedestrian accommodations are not just the bare minimum. Today, you have a lot of little 4-foot sidewalks, the bare minimum. So we're recommending 8-foot sidewalks and full new modern pedestrian and bicycle crossings at all the respective locations. Going to continue a little bit to the north. This is the segment essentially between Neponset Circle and Pope's Hill Circle. First thing I'd like to draw some attention to is the roadway here. And for folks that are more interested in detail, there's some typical sections. So this is the first time we're really introducing again the roadway reconfiguration, where we're proposing here to reduce the number of through lanes on Morrissey Boulevard from 3 to 2, essentially throughout the corridor. So as we head north from Neponset Circle, that's where we start to pick up that cross section. We've identified what we call like a median area near the I-93 off-ramp as a really good opportunity for a stormwater detention infiltration facility. In the area, this southern part of the corridor, the flooding we experience is actually more from stormwater flooding than like sea level rise or water coming from the ocean. So the more we can do to delay the amount of water that gets to our stormwater infrastructure by letting it infiltrate, by having basins that hold it, are going to help us in this urban corridor. At Pope's Hill Circle, we are proposing to remove the existing southbound U-turn. Folks who currently do that from Pope's Hill and kind of duck out and make this, I'll call it dangerous maneuver, would then go about a half-mile south and use the U-turn near the Divine Ring. That U-turn has a full deceleration lane. It's a much safer location for drivers to make that maneuver. It's about a mile in total, down and back. Per our traffic analyses, it's about 2 to 4 minutes. It should come with a significant benefit to safety and crash prevention. As we continue to the north, I want to focus for a moment on this intersection complex at Victory Road and Freeport Street. As we're getting towards the oh boy, that's not the laser. As we're getting towards that I-93 bottleneck, we have 3 93 off-ramp, 93 off-ramp, and 93 on-ramp. These destinations, attractors, are bringing additional trips through this area in addition to this geometric bottleneck we've got ourselves with the I-93 underpass. So it's a challenging situation. There's a lot of traffic volumes to deal with. One of the ways we've talked about doing this throughout the project is by simplifying these intersections. We're asking these intersections to do a lot by handling all the movements at one place. So our ideas at Freeport Street consolidate around reducing the number of movements. And the first alternative we looked at essentially moves southbound left turns down to Victory Road. So by eliminating that one major movement and just relocating it down the road, it enables that intersection to operate a lot more efficiently. We have a second alternative that is depicted over here that adds on to that, and it's called the quadrant roadway. The difference here is, in addition to those southbound lefts being moved down, those northbound lefts are also moved to Victory Road, where they would then make a right and then the left on Freeport to continue up through the intersection. So the quadrant roadway removes both of those left turns from the intersection. We are still proceeding through some of the final steps of our VISA microsimulation analysis. Based on those first meetings, we did decide to recommend eliminating the median U-turn alternative at this location. It occupied a lot more space, required a lot more impervious area, and I think some of the initial feedback we got was very negative to that effect. As we consider how this Freeport intersection operates, we've also drawn our attention to the Victory Road intersection. There's a possibility to potentially eliminate this frontage road that currently acts to provide access to both Victory Road and the development plaza. We're looking at an alternative to that that could potentially remove the service road. It would create just one signalized intersection, and drivers would then enter once to leave Morrissey Boulevard rather than having the frontage road with a series of right in, right out exits. That is depicted more thoroughly on a rendering. I think it's right there. So moving beyond 93 towards the important central section, you'll probably thinking that you haven't heard me talk enough about coastal resilience yet. And that's because in the southern section of the project, we've identified that there are, and coordinated with DCR, the city, a variety of other important agencies and stakeholders to understand that there are other projects responsible for protecting Dorchester and Morrissey Boulevard further south. But once we cross I-93, Morrissey Boulevard really is that first line of defense against coastal flooding, sea level rise. So that's our priority here. And we've identified essentially 2 primary decision points that have a couple of different ramifications. The first one is we can put a surge barrier on the Beads Bridge. That's basically a gate that we can close. And that, if we elevate the Beads Bridge, if we raise Morrissey Boulevard, would allow us to not raise, elevate parts of Malibu Beach around the back. And so what we could do is we would, what we would do is we could have a roadway profile that gets us as high as we need to be, but it could descend. And that would help minimize construction costs. It could minimize construction duration, but it would leave you with a wall to your right as you headed north. We've developed 3 alternative profiles. The first one I discussed is, I'll call it sort of the low profile, where it would go across the Beads Bridge, come down, but we would still have our flood wall that is at this design flood elevation. It's elevation about 16. So it would be 4, 6, 8 foot wall to your right as you were on the cycle track or walking on the sidewalk. So as an alternative to that, that's not necessarily ideal. We have what we call a high profile where, and this would work in particular if we don't, and it could be difficult to get permitting approval for such a surge barrier, especially if we're relying on it closing a lot. There are different design floods that it could be designed to. And so if we either didn't put it there or designed it so that it didn't offer as much flood protection, we may need to raise some of these elevations in Malibu Beach to protect those floodwaters that would come in the basin and kind of wrap around, protect Morrissey Boulevard. That would mean elevating sections of Malibu Beach and therefore keeping the Morrissey Boulevard roadway at a higher elevation to be able to stay connected to them. So what does that look like? We have the profile, I believe it's the top one, where you'd end up with Morrissey Boulevard on top of an embankment for the most part. We'd be just kind of riding along at the top of that flood elevation. In your car, you'd be seeing out over the ocean. On your bike, you'd see the ocean. And then that would also require a lot of fill. So there's a third profile that's a hybrid, where we essentially kind of try to find the middle ground. And so I think we're at that design stage where often the evolution leads us towards a hybrid solution, but we'd be happy to talk you through the pros and cons of that more. Not settled yet, but certainly looking like a hybrid solution where we have a wall stays as the top at the right height, but we sort of balance how low the road goes and keep Malibu Beach a little high. I'm not sure I'm doing the best explanation of that with my hands, but I'd be happy to talk to you guys more at the profile there. That wasn't the button. That was. So as we continue to the north, folks that were here last time probably remember a lot of discussion at Cooley Boulevard. We've taken a lot of that feedback to heart. We feel like a clear recommended alternative has sort of emerged in terms of the lane configuration, the turns. There was not a lot of interest in that median U-turn that would, have a large footprint. So this is what was originally called the DCR alternative. Essentially, it creates one more unified intersection at Cooley Boulevard instead of having today where you have the big frontage road that's way over to the right, and then you've got your main Morrissey Boulevard. This brings those movements together well north of there and has a much more simple intersection. And it also removes the big northbound sweeping right turn lane that encourages high speeds. We did, and it's hard to see at this scale. We took a hard look at Old Colony Terrace after all this conversation last time. And I think what we came up with is in this DCR alternative and with the reduced roadway cross section going to 3 lanes to 2, it actually gives us enough space to put in a full deceleration and acceleration lane at Old Colony Terrace. It's probably, again, difficult to make out of the scale, but I'd be happy to kind of walk you through it over at the plots. And that essentially will give drivers enough distance in their own lane outside the travel lane to slow down to make a 5, 10, 15 mile an hour right turn into Old Colony Terrace. And then when they're headed southbound, it would give you some time to accelerate up to the travel speed so that you could appropriately merge over onto Morrissey Boulevard. Another key component of this section between Cooley Boulevard and Kosciuszko Circle is the potential for a new intersection at what we're calling First Street. This plan was first identified in the Columbia Point Master Plan almost 10 years ago, and its main focus is to encourage east-west connectivity between the potential development sites to the west and to the east of Morrissey Boulevard. There are opportunities for how such an intersection could be handled. What we're depicting in this plan view is a full traditional signalized intersection. And we talked a little bit about this last time, and there were some pretty fair questions about what the heck was happening with the frontage road before it got to First Street. And so we've looked at that. What we've drawn here is this is the, I guess it's Old Colony Terrace, whatever the frontage road is called here. It would merge into Morrissey Boulevard, right where, you know where those grades meet. You're coming down, we're coming up, right about there. And they'd have their own, we call it a pre-signal. It's a little signalized intersection ahead of a signal, and it basically controls two legs of traffic going in the same direction. In this instance, with the traffic volumes heavily favoring Morrissey Boulevard, it would probably be green 95% of the time for Morrissey Boulevard, but would have detection set up so that folks could enter in from the frontage road. And I think there's an update elsewhere in the presentation on a circle. And so I'll continue to the north, which is not the north. This is the zoom in of Cooley Boulevard. My apologies, which allows me to, again, reinforce. It may still be hard to see here, but this is that deceleration lane to Old Colony Terrace. And again, the idea here is you get through this intersection, you pull to the right, you get to slow down without, looking in your rearview mirror and praying. And this is another blow up of the First Street signalized intersection. You can see again how this gray here, right? This gray here, right? That's all that existing wide frontage road cross section. So we're looking at narrowing the amount of space the roadway, the sidewalks take up by, gosh, almost half the width of the corridor in place. Sure, fair question. So the idea is, oh, I'm sorry. So the question is, where does First Street go? It appears to go nowhere. The idea is it would serve future developments of that site. It would be primarily built in support of a future redevelopment of the former Globe, the line development on the west side, and then also to facilitate movements across. But it's a fair question because there's an alternative to it. And the alternative to it is we do not signalize it. We maintain access to a First Street via the service roads. And we could do that, which would be similar to what exists today with a slightly reduced width to the cross section. So you had to follow up. You're good. That's a fair point. Ethan, I see you kidding.
If we could just get through the rest of the presentation, we are going to open it up to the commission members and then the public. So just for the flow, we just get through and then we can certainly take questions. Thank you.
So here is the alternative to that idea of signalizing that intersection. And it just essentially would function similar to how it does today with the frontage roads, with new access in west of Morrissey provided via the right in, right out. One time I'm going to hit the laser pointer instead of next slide. Moving to the very northernmost segment. This is beyond Pashuto Circle up to what is now Rebel Circle, but as you can see, we are not depicting it as a circle. And so that's sort of the most fundamental aspect to this most northern part of the corridor, the recommendation to convert the Preble Circle from the current rotary traffic circle to a signalized intersection. Through the analysis and the discussion last time, the significant operational benefits and the discussion with the public, the slightly smaller footprint it offered had deemed it a favored alternative. Since then, we have come back in, tightened up the design a little bit. We removed all of those right turn slip lanes to help improve the pedestrian bicyclist experience. And then the last point of note along this Columbia Road segment, the first recommendation is to convert the existing buffered bike lanes to parking protected bike lanes to help avoid the potential dooring issues. And then secondly, to consolidate all of the pedestrian crossings at the two unsignalized intersections. rather than having them scattered mid-block where drivers are less expectant of pedestrians to cross. So with that, turn things back over to you.
Thank you, Casey. And we are going to get through the next section of the presentation and then open it up to commission as well as the public. Okay, so I'm calling it initial because a big part of our process is getting to these layouts that we're both showing here on the screen today, but also again on the wall. You know, we've been hearing a lot throughout the process that this is what people want to see, which we totally understand. But all of our process leading up to it allows us to build these. And then once we've built these layouts, it really allows us to do most of our analysis. Granted, we were able to bring some of the operational stuff early, but that's more to deal with the early concept intersections that we can then build the full layout. So we acknowledge that we're going to hear a lot of feedback on this information that we present. But please be aware that it is our initial pass. We want part of our study process is to come out and talk to the public about the work we're doing. And we want to hear feedback so that we don't get to the end and hear all this feedback. So this is a good touch point. But to be clear, we are going to have a final analysis at the end. So this graphic here was meant to show how we align our evaluation criteria with the commission goals. And again, mobility, resiliency, placemaking, and constructability kind of aligns with our own evaluation criteria. And so evaluation criteria are essentially metrics and measures. So we use this evaluation criteria, so after we've done our process of alternatives development and analysis, how do we analyze? We have to use evaluation criteria to ultimately compare an earlier condition like an existing infrastructure or future no build to these variations of alternatives. Some are specific to locations, others have to be looked at on a corridor-wide basis. Hence why some of our analysis is still underway, because now that we've completed our layouts, we've gone full steam ahead on analysis. So just transitioning to this slide here. These are what we commonly use for our evaluation criteria or metrics. It's just in a very bulleted form here, very succinct. I actually have a bit of descriptors that I'm going to rely on a little bit more for some of them. But basically, so for mobility, we look at delay at the intersection level. We also sort of look at total hours of delay in the corridor, vehicle queuing, vehicle access to sites, to entrances, things like that. Transit access, how easy it is to access certain points in the corridor for transit vehicles and or those seeking to go to transit stations. Pedestrian crossing comfort, that is pedestrian comfort at intersections generally, but there are also points in the corridor where there are mid-block crossings. Pedestrian gaps, we look to close any north, south, east, west gaps in the corridor. A way to look at bicycling is stress level, or level of comfort. The more bicyclists feel comfortable driving, the more they'll generally use it. So we have a measure of bicycle crossing stress. Potential safety effects, that's sort of somewhat of a, we look at what types of treatments and is there an expectation that it's a safer environment. Resiliency and ecology, we want to look at effects, impacts on environmental resources. I'm going to pause there on that one real quick because that's probably one of the more key aspects to getting a project done is environmental permitting. So our study process mirrors what the environmental permitting process would be. So after a study, we're in a conceptual study phase. As any project or projects move forward, they would have to enter typically into a permitting phase. How long that permitting phase is determined at the beginning of that. But we understand that it does have to go through some level. So we, in a study phase, try to mirror that and also minimize impacts and maximize benefits. And a part of that is looking at impervious surface. So obviously, it's a lot of benefits to having less impervious surface. AC mentioned some of the stormwater retention areas, heat islands. There's a lot of different impacts or positive benefits related to impervious surface. We look at placemaking, open space, obviously visual effects. With climate resiliency, there is a elevation change that is we're looking at. So visual effects is something that we consider. Consistency with plans. So we're not the only plan here, right? There's a lot of other plans that are going on. So part of our process is to make sure that we're consistent with either local, regional, or state level plans that are going on in the area. Part of our early process was to document all of that. Disruption to any neighborhoods, whether that be access or, again, diverting traffic to neighborhoods. Recreational access, obviously there's a lot of points along the corridor that would need to provide access to recreational areas. Shade trees, an important part of placemaking, but also resiliency. We have having shade trees reduces heat islands. There's a lot of benefits to shade trees. And then constructability. There's a lot associated with constructability, whether it be the cost. Constructability is the ease of getting it through. So we're going to look at some level of expectations of permitting. We don't define permitting in the conceptual phase, but we can look at what potential pitfalls there may be or things we have to look out for. Maintenance concerns. Often when we look at something, a corridor, we want to make sure that in the future, anything we do for infrastructural improvements can be maintained. We just don't want to build it and not have the ability to maintain it, or is it difficult to maintain? So that's a big part of it as well. And also we try to strive for low maintenance options. In environmental permits and complexity, that kind of ties back to constructability, but we break it out in this a different category. So I'm going to turn it over to Jay Duncan from our consultant team. He's going to walk through the evaluation criteria that we've grouped at the intersection level at this point. Some of them are ultimately going to be at the corridor level, but right now we just wanted to bring our initial analysis to you and show it, but understanding that there's still some work to be done. And ultimately, I think just wrapping this up before Jay takes it over, there's going to be a lot of information thrown at you and it's going to be much more graphical. Ultimately, we are developing a report that is going to have much more text, narrative, and detail that shows all this. It's just obviously not easy to show it all on a screen. So with that said, we understand there's going to be questions, but there's also going to be a lot more detail in the ultimate product that we have. So I'm turning it over to Jay right now.
Thanks, Ethan. So eventually, we have to get down to a recommended option with, and as you can see, there's kind of like a menu, right? Different intersections, we've looked at different solutions. We're using this process right now, which is really kind of a qualitative process. We're not getting into a lot of detail and technical detail. It's just really like when we take a look at it, what are the general characteristics in each of these 4 categories and 21 kind of sub areas of each option. Some of them we've already eliminated. For example, in the ponds that we felt that the preponderance of the information led us to that, and it was in this case of the DCR alternative, it was a great solution. Didn't seem like we needed to change much. So we're using this process now, kind of at a localized level, to get to the next step. In the future, as Ethan said, we will look at the corridor-wide impacts, for example, from traffic standpoint. We're going to talk about that a little later. So in terms of this right now, what we really have done is we've kind of all sat down, all the technical folks looked at each intersection and come up with an assessment or a rating for each. It is not weighted at all. We haven't said one thing is more important than the other, although some categories have more criteria than others. So, that might lead you to believe that they're a little bit more important. But I think when we get down to the real, the final product, there will be more detail. But at this point, we're kind of using this process and we have kind of the colored scale to give you a sense a little bit more visual analysis in this case to be able to understand where we are at with different alternatives at these locations. And we said before, for example, Neponset, we've already kind of decided based on the information we've collected and the work we've done, and also another key piece of this is public input. Right, there may be things that we need to look into more detail, or that we, folks in the neighborhood and the community give us impact, which is input that we've gotten throughout the process, and we take that, and you've seen some of the results of that and the work we've done since. So we'll continue to do that as we go through this process. Generally showing for for the mobility criteria, some are great, some are generally not as good, but now I got to work this thing. So that's how that rated. In terms of some of these other criteria, in terms of the resiliency and ecology criteria, I mean, we aren't changing the impervious surface, though. Actually, we're reducing it a little bit, but if there's anything at all we can, hang our hats on, so to speak, we're kind of going in that area with it. In terms of placemaking, in this case, this is a green check, right? This is a great opportunity. It really doesn't speak to the tremendous opportunity we have at this location to create much more of a scale, a human scale, for the under and around the infrastructure that's there. Also, the safety improvements from the steps that we want to take there. That one really doesn't have much of a comparison. The construction cost isn't a huge construction cost because we are using mostly existing infrastructure, and constructability, same kind of situation there, because we really don't have a lot of disruption and we're not doing much. Maintenance is pretty much the same because it's about the same, and complexity is neutral because there are things that we have to do and processes we have to go through, but basically it's not very significant because it's most of the infrastructure there. Next, for Freeport Street, there wasn't a lot to really differentiate these too much in these cases in terms of mobility. You can see they rated pretty similarly, and it's a little unusual here because we have not a lot of different components within this little piece of roadway. And we didn't have the other victory option here yet. But in terms of the resiliency, you can see how they are very similar. And then in terms of placemaking criteria, Victory Road gives you a little bit more positive opportunity there, but for the most part, they're pretty close in terms of the other two. And then constructability, obviously, because Victory Road full intersection completely disrupts the whole roadway, and we have to, create a new intersection. Whereas the others, you're just realigning some of the infrastructure there. So that's obvious why that one would have the red X. In terms of being Cooley, we did have the different options here to kind of show you comparison. But we also did, as you can see from our work here, we kind of already have, we've already decided that the DCR design is probably the best in this situation. And here's the other criteria for resiliency and placement. All fairly similar in terms of the first two, but our analysis and the feedback and other things have led us to that one solution there. And then here's the constructability ones. Again, we're really going through this fast. There's a lot that's behind it. If you have any other questions, let us know. But kind of gives you a real good visual sense of how things are rating. So First Street, you saw there's different examples here. Obviously, the big issue here with the difference between the two is signalized control. It's going to slow the traffic down. You have an intersection where you don't have one now. So the overall impact on the whole network is that you're going to have some negative impacts there, and that's reflected here. Resiliency and ecology and placemaking generally, pretty close. So there's nothing that really differentiates those significantly between each other. And then the constructability criteria, again, this one from environmental and permit complexity, there's a lot more construction, so it's going to rate out as well. Prebble Circle, again, another situation where we have, based on our analysis and feedback, we have come up with a solution here already. This is also an opportunity to say, hey, is there anything we missed? Do you not agree? Should we talk about that? As our criteria and our thinking, is it misguided? So from our standpoint, the signalized control, huge improvement from a safety and a traffic standpoint. They're critical here. And again, we're not strongly weighting things at this point, but that is a strong consideration. Most of the other things they rated about the same. But here on these two, you can see it's also, even though it's leaning towards, some of these are leaning towards the modern roundabout, we did, based on all the input and the technical analysis, lean towards the signalized control here. And then constructability, here's our ratings, which, not a huge differentiation between the two. Resilience options, not a lot, I think Ethan talked about it a little bit, and I think it's not a lot driving you in this analysis here. They all kind of rate the same. So I think we really need to dive more into it, get feedback on, think about how we're going to implement it, and the different options. It's hard to really understand what we're talking about, but basically, as Ethan said before, we're talking about different levels of the roadway and protection on both sides that may impact Malibu Beach, and it may impact constructability and cost savings. So those are the things that kind of might drive that more than anything. But with that, that's just a really quick, a lot of information and work went into that. I hope that was helpful. Again, we can talk about it more if there's any specific area you want to dive into, but I'm going to turn it over to Ethan, who's going to talk about the traffic analysis or the transportation modeling piece of that, which will be done for the whole corridor when we do decide what our recommendation will look like.
Thank you, Jay. I should note there are Sharpies attached to these layouts, so please feel free to mark them up with any comments you'd like. Also, this presentation, it's in process of being put online, so I don't think it's live as of right now, but it should be live very soon. It's been uploaded. It just needs to have some type of button live. So I just wanted to pause here real quick after the evaluation criteria discussion, because this is about sort of the analysis and how we take this and next steps to the next meeting. And a refresher for everyone, the last couple of meetings, we brought a lot of, it's called synchro analysis, which is just a proprietary software that looks at intersection operations at a sort of an individualized basis. So we kind of walk through that for anyone that has attended prior meetings or looked at the prior presentations, all that information was synchro based. So then from all that, the synchro that we presented, the feedback we heard from everybody, we have study process. The layouts are sort of our alternative, what we achieve through our alternatives development process. So after development, which we've completed with the layouts, we do our analysis. With that said, we transition from what synchro is to what's called VisSim, and technically I think it stands for like visual simulation. So this VisSim is a little bit different than synchro in that instead of standalone intersections, it is the entire corridor. And it's extremely resource and time intensive to put together. So now that we're done with the layout, this is in production. But in the meantime, we showed all the analysis that we could show given the work completed to date. So what I'm prefacing all this because understanding what we've been hearing, we just wanted to show a very short preview of what ultimately the VISIM will look like when we show it at a future meeting, next meeting. The location I'm going to be showing, I'm not advancing it because it, in theory, will run as soon as I advance the slide. It is at Bianculli, it just because we understand that that was a location that was talked about a lot. It is the first visual is going to be the existing condition, and then a follow-on slide will be the build condition that's in the layout shown. And so this is what's called a 3D simulation, you could call it that. But I just wanted to give a sense of ultimately what we will be showing at the next meeting. This is just going to be vehicular as well, and it's also going to be bicycle pedestrian in addition to vehicles for the full VISIM. But this is just to help people understand what it is that's being worked on. Hey. So Bianculli here, obviously Morrissey here, and this is the no build modeling. So call it future no build. So it's essentially the existing infrastructure. As you can see right now, the queuing is pretty far. This is the AM or the PM. This is the AM. And so again, this is just a loop run. It's not going to continue to, it doesn't run all day. It's just a very quick clip. So this is the DCR design that we have shown. And so this is the operation. Oh. A date as in, correct. So both of them are in theory, the year 2050. That's not to say when a project does not tie to that. We look at a horizon year out a certain time to make sure that we incorporate future demographics, any improvements that we do actually last a certain amount of time. So this is a future, it does incorporate both future demographic changes, volume changes, but also the cross-section change on Morrissey. So this was just meant to give a bit of a preview of what our next meeting will hold. We've been here, I've been saying we're going to have some visual simulations. So I just wanted to be able to show ultimately what it is we're going to show at our next meeting. We're going to open it up to commission discussion.
Thank you, Ethan.
Sorry, but this is just the.
Yeah, I can read that slide. Any discussion from commission members? If so, raise your hand or just turn your mic on.
I guess I'll have one question. Can we assume that throughout that you broke it up into 5 different sections, right? Most of them, with a couple of them having 2 options, right?
Correct.
We can assume that there is a mix and match here where there is not one that we can do that will then prohibit the next one from being done. It can be, we can just say in this section, we want this one, we want this one, and it will all continuously work, correct?
Generally, yeah. There are some that are tied to each other. For example, First Street, Victory Road
and Freeport.
In Freeport. That one. So that one is somewhat tied, but there is interchangeability. Yes.
Okay, great. Good. The only other question I have, this is a lot, right? I got to think about this more, and even for the community, there's a lot more we got to sort of like look at, and then next time we're on it, we got to think about it when we're driving through, and what it would feel like and look like for us. But just a couple of very detailed questions on one ways on the section from Pope's Hill, like Tolman, Freeport, Pope's Hill, and Victory, right? Coming off of, if you're coming southbound. I'm just thinking of other issues that I hear about in the community around some of these streets. Would it help to, if Pope's Hill and Freeport were one ways coming off of Morrissey and having Tolman and a one-way only entering onto Morrissey? Just because I know there's parking issues on Tolman, people park up on the sidewalk there, and so I'm trying to think of how to make that a one-way. And then Pope's Hill, you have the Murphy School, and there's buses getting out, et cetera, and it causes a lot of anxiety in that neighborhood as well. Just maybe that's something that we can think about. I know it's not necessarily part of the Morrissey Boulevard per se, but I'm thinking if you have Freeport and Pope's Hill as almost exits, and you circle back around to Tolman and Victory like that, it provides sort of a nice, superfluous motion here, circular motion that could have to have it be done. I'm making up words as I'm up here.
Understood.
But regardless, just wanted to drop that line as well, because I think it also solves other issues that are completely irrelevant to you guys and what you're supposed to be here to do, but just stuff that I hear, that it could also help solve those issues as well as we go along. I open it up to anybody else.
Three quick things. First of all, I very much appreciate all the good work, and to echo the counselor, there's a tremendous amount here. So looking forward to digesting it a little bit more. First, thinking about the final meeting, it would be great to have as part of that a funding and next steps conversation to make sure that we are coming to consensus and then thinking about how we move this work forward. Second, and Jay, you mentioned this, it would be great to have a follow-up conversation on the tide gate, no tide gate, and hybrid option. Happy to be a part of that. Happy to have our Water and Sewer Commission, who has an interest in this stretch, be a part of it, and obviously has implications for the DCR Park, and to think about Commissioner Rigo and his team to be a part of that. So however you want to schedule that, happy to help set that up and to think about whether that's a community conversation, what the right ways to do that. The third piece is that in that Columbia Road stretch, where we have a pair of consolidated, and I think you said unsignalized pedestrian crossings, just to look at that from a safety perspective to make sure that we are finding a way for people to cross from the residential side to Mowgli Park in a safe crossing. And we'd love to think about what that looks like in our next meeting.
Yes, thank you. And that was Chris Osgood representing the city of Boston. I've been asked to remind the commissioners to announce who they are, because people online can't necessarily see the 10 cards. So this is.
This is Jake Walkman. I'm the designee for Senator Collins. First of all, two compliments for the working group here. I think that the road geometry generally looks pretty good. Like, obviously there's some small things to tweak about it. I also think DCR, I have to commend DCR on the short-term improvements, which have really, I think, been much more than we initially thought. So that's great. Like, Morrissey is looking much better right now, even based on the feedback from the community. The big question, what's been on my mind this entire time is, what about everything else that's in the law that made this commission? And the big one is K Circle, right? And it's in the law. And if you remember at meetings 2 and 3, we were promised that the team that did K Circle, they're recorded, by the way. I think we were told that those meetings, they would come to the next meeting. They're not here in the law. It's a really important part of the Morrissey corridor as defined in the law. The other big thing in the law is a comprehensive plan, right? And does not mean a comprehensive plan for asphalt. And that's unfortunate that we aren't really, I think, maximizing what we can do here for community and for future generations. And, the third one, which is the most concerning, is I think that the berm that is now kind of the wall, we're getting actually less detail on it as time goes on, and it might be actually getting higher, but it's unclear. And the floodgate seems like we might be losing that for cost cutting, and we aren't really sure about the true implications of that. So the road is good, but everything else is kind of lacking, and that's really unfortunate, I think, as a result of this commission. And it doesn't really match with what the law says about what this commission should be doing.
I was just going to say, I think, so our study, again, is conceptual. The K Circle Columbia Road project is in project development. understanding the concerns, but ultimately these projects will converge. And so I think they're not standalones. They ultimately are going to have to be worked together in project development. So understanding the concerns, but we will be ultimately, they will have to be coordinated. As far as the tide gates, I think we definitely, as part of our next meeting, we look to have a bit more detail on that. We had a lot of information to provide today, so we've been sort of trying to package it all together in a certain way. And so ultimately there are some graphics of the tide gate, but or tide gates options. And so ultimately we could have included more, apologies, but we have it on the layout. And ultimately this is online too. So we were hoping that would certainly help people understand a little better, but we'll try to do a better job for the next meeting.
Yes, Frank.
Yep, thank you. A couple things. First, the First Street, I believe there was a question up front. That is probably under the ownership of the development team that's there. So that would be something that it would have to be worked out. Like you had asked if that should be on the developers. That probably, just looking at it, not knowing what the ownership is, I think it's part of that the Center Court development. So they, in all probability, would come up with most of that, but not really sure. And also to speak to Chris Osgood about bringing the water and sewer here. I think it's very important that we do talk about water quality and what we can do with the stormwater coming in, as opposed to, and if it is a wall, a berm, whatever it is, we have to do something like that, then I guess we have to do it. But that, to me, feels like we're going to keep that water in Malibu stagnant, keep the water on Dorchester Bay there over at UMass. I mean, I think we should be looking at ways to move that water along, and maybe that's part of the water and source stormwater program. So I think that we should really have a good understanding of what that project is, because if we're holding all the water in on top of the neighborhood and we can't, it's even more difficult for us now to get from, in particular, this neighborhood and the Savin Hill neighborhood to get to the ocean, where, you know, we should have some sort of respite from all the traffic and noise and everything else that's going on. So just a couple of thoughts. Agree with Chris wholeheartedly on the water and sewer. Before we're making big decisions about berms and tide gates and all that other stuff. So thank you. And the First Street, I believe, is probably mostly privately owned.
Thank you. Any other commissioners? Because we'd like to open up to the public soon. Jim?
Hey, Jim Fitzgerald with the Boston Planning Department. Just to confirm what Frank said, that First Street completion of it, either Boston Junction or Dorchester Bay City project, and then any continuation the other side of Morrissey also done in conjunction development. But I think it's important that we anticipate that was component, the Columbia Point master plan that, you know, was needed for network. Oh, sorry. Then again, just to echo what everyone's saying, I think we're making some good progress here on the design alternatives and the approach to the design. And as Chris said, looking forward to, you know, how do we continue the momentum after this commission meeting then?
And then we'll let the counselor have the last commission speak, and then we'll open up to the public.
Thank you very much. Just a compliment and a critique. One, thank you for the presentation today. I think it was very good. I look forward to the graphics again as we see more of those. I think that will help all of us sort of understand the flow a bit better. Just a critique, I have to run because we've had other things scheduled. We sort of got a short notice for this. I know it was only about 8 days.
Apology.
And then, you know, in the future, I already got a couple other things that were already on the schedule for tonight. So I apologize. I have to leave. Amanda from my office is here to hear folks, the concerns from the community. But also, and just getting the slide deck. So it, you know, at least to the commission members, a little bit sooner. So, because when it is a lot to digest like this, you know, we'd like to come in with a little bit more understanding, but do appreciate the great job you guys are doing. And I don't think there's anything in here that initially is like off the charts, no go at the moment. I'll let the community speak to what they feel, but there are things that I think some of us just have to kind of wrap our head around, and we'll get there on some of it, and other things we'll have to tweak a bit. But thank you very much for giving me the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And now, Ethan, because this setup and you're at the front, I'm gonna let you call on people as they raise their hand.
Okay.
Because it'd be a little weird for me to try to.
Understood. Happy birthday. I thought the deck was his birthday present. Okay. Public comment. So we have a runner. Thanks, boss. Okay. So for those, share your questions and comments. Hybrid meeting, in person and virtual moderators will work together to ensure attendees in both spaces can share their questions and comments. Moderators will take a few comments at a time in one space and then switch through the public comment period, the space being in person or virtual. If multiple people ask the same question, moderators, me, will inform the audience how many asked and answer the question once. So first, you had your hand up first. Quickly.
Thank you. Ethan, is it possible we could go back to slide 22? And could I borrow your point?
Assume we'll be sticking around towards the layout slides. Oh.
Okay. So zone 2 in the whole alignment, most pressing climate resilience portion.
Could you identify yourself too, if you haven't?
Yeah, sure. I'm John Rich. I'm a Savin Hill resident.
Thank you.
Is it possible I could borrow your laser pointer?
Sure.
Thank you. That green line right there. The lower one? Okay. So, also, I commend all the work that's being done. It's a big project. One thing about this area, Savin Hill Cove and Dorchester Bay Basin, and not in the slide is Patton's Cove, but they're all related. And one of the things that comes up in many of the slides is ecological and environmental issues. We've talked about the berm in this area, and the charts over there behind Jay. One of the alternatives, you'll see the elevation rise up there is like 11 feet 2 inches above existing. That's really previously it was projected 7 to 8 feet for 100-year storm and sea level rise 2070 conditions. One brief other comment. MWRA Deer Island has greatly improved water quality in the harbor. Everybody appreciates it. A lot of people talk about it, but when Morrissey Boulevard, originally Old Colony Parkway, was built, finished around 1920, all of this soil in here is fill. If you look at the previous maps, say you go back to like 1894 map of Dorchester, this all had tidal flow. It was all connected to the rest of Dorchester Bay and the inner harbor and the outer harbor. UMass Boston Marine Biology Department tells us that because of this barrier, the rate of sediment deposition inside Dorchester Bay Basin is 10 times what it is out here, farther out in the bay. So the water quality has improved, but over time, the sediment buildup in here has really degraded the ecology, the marine ecology, and the public use aspect of this space. Another way to think about the climate resiliency is to make this portion of Morrissey Boulevard to this intersection with Fox Point Viaduct dredge out the whole basin, ecologically dredge it. And go into the details how to do it, but it's well-established work that's been going on since the early 1990s in elsewhere on the East Coast. You can take that highly toxic material. This is some of the most polluted material in Boston Harbor, is documented by MWRA and UMass Boston Marine Biology Department. This stuff can safely be captured, dewatered, contained, and uses it as a base layer to take this fill, this 1920 fill, and place it all around the perimeter of Dorchester Bay, make that the climate resilient berm, make this part a viaduct so that we restore the tidal flow, put a sound attenuation barrier all along the intersection with I-93. This is more money to build a viaduct in here, but if we accomplish environmental restoration, there's funding available for that. And it's something that is now part of state law, and it's something that is part of Mass Department of Energy and Environment. And it's not like we're bringing it up totally out of the blue. It's already part of state policy, be trying to restore wetlands and create cleaner environment. If we did that, all of this material can be hydraulically pumped across, and so the berm would be all around here. It could also go all around here and around where the Veterans Memorial is, all the way over to Cooley Boulevard, to a suitable elevation where it intersects over there. So if you did that, restore the tidal flow, you would eliminate the existing, it's an unmitigated hazard to public safety with how deep this muck is in this bay. So at any rate, that's a lot, but I appreciate the time, just do a real rough sketch of that. I think we should be considering that, because if we don't, it's going to lock in all of this stuff for decades. We have an opportunity to get rid of it and make this a much better environment.
So we are in the conceptual phase of planning. So there is a permitting process, environmental permitting, so things like that could potentially be looked at. We have your submission. It's part of the public record. It's going to be included in the study. So as anything moves forward, it's included in the process as far as a public comment. And again, we are conceptual. The environmental permitting phase scopes it. They scope it at that point, and so things like that could be potentially looked at, but that's not something that we obviously look at in this phase, nor is within our control right now. So please, Evan. Again, please, just as a reminder, please say your name for the audience.
Hi, this is Selena. I'm a 7 Hill neighbor. Can we go to the slide that shows between Fox Point and beyond Cooley Boulevard, please?
Sure.
So I've noticed that the U-turn that was in previous suggestions is removed there, but on the slide there is a left turn right before the Savin Hill Yacht Club.
This is just off screen.
What is the benefit of that left lane turn? It does not look like it is a full U-turn, and there is no stop sign or traffic signals right in front of it going in the northbound lane.
Is this the graphic you want on?
No, in details, it's over there, but I'm just showing the location.
The detail slide. Here we go.
It's right to the left of that where you cannot see anything.
Okay, apologies. I don't think so. We didn't.
It's in your detail slide on the board.
It's on the board. I'm sorry.
The right of us, the left of you. but you could still answer.
Yeah,
What is the benefit of that left lane turn? If it's not a full U-turn, it doesn't look like there's any light signals or a stop sign there.
I have to say, I'm just trying to catch up with what you're saying. So can you?
It's to get into the yacht club. So by providing the deceleration lane and then providing, so I believe there is a signal there. Mike, correct me if I'm wrong. We have a
Is that signal for walking? Is there going to be a red light signal for traffic? Like permanently installed there now?
Yes, there will be a signal there. So, Mike with Howard Stein, this is the project team. There will be a signal there. There'll be a crosswalk. There'll be left turns out into the yacht club, southbound U-turn.
So it will be a U-turn because it looks like it doesn't go completely around in the pictures.
They would be permitted.
We trimmed it back. This is Casey Harden from the design team. Looking at the design vehicles, we're able to keep the because the geometry is a little unique. You get some extra space to make the turn because of the extra lanes and the offset in the median. So it just looks a little smaller there than it used to when it was further north, just because of geometry.
Okay, so it will be a permanent traffic signal going northbound?
Correct. It won't be read very often going northbound. It'll only be cued by the detection when there's someone waiting to make that U-turn or turn. And frankly, those people will probably wait a minute or two in that. That's why we have that left turn pocket outside the travel lane. So you're not sitting there staring in your rearview mirror.
Okay. And I did notice that there is now a pullout onto Morrissey Boulevard from Old Colony Terrace. Thank you very much for listening to us about that. People pulling out will be able to go into that U-turn to make the northbound turn.
There won't. It's far enough away. There's not going to be an official barrier against it. I think 9 times out of 10, people probably won't try it. If traffic's moving at speed, it'll be difficult to make the maneuver just physically. I think during off-peak periods, you have 500-600 feet. It's plenty of space to make the weaving. I'm just saying at 6 p.m. when traffic is very heavy going southbound, it may be difficult to get over that number of lanes to make the left.
I know there's lots of questions. Is this still going to be considered a boulevard or is it going to be considered a parkway like I've overheard? And if that's the case, what are the speeds that are proposed for north and southbound lanes? Are they the same as currently?
Good question. So it is a parkway. It is technically designated as a parkway. That was the part. Hey, Mike, I believe the design speed's 45.
So it's increased?
And I'm wrong. Apologies. Go ahead, Mike.
I mean, we look at target speed and lines much later in the process, getting more formal design. We do want to reduce long corridor in general. So probably be looking at 35 or so, but the reality is still a pretty straight section. We don't have a ton of opportunity to do things like traffic calming on a major arterial like this. So at those times, like late at night, people still may be speeding. In actual design, we would do everything possible to mitigate speeding on the corridor, but we still want to design safely to have that lane pull out from Old Colony Terrace.
Just one last comment. When you do the visualizations of the traffic roads, do you think you could consider doing them at times when the 8 schools in the area are in session and parents are doing drop-offs, pickups, and students are commuting to and for? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Oh, you can answer that. Is that a yes?
No, I think so generally the AM and the PM peaks are somewhat when the schools are in the afternoon. It's sort of the beginning of the PM peak, but our traffic counts are typically within when school is in session. So it does account for trips related to going to and from school, but we would not target a time where school is letting out per se, but it is the AM and the PM peak periods where there is still a lot of that vehicular movement, as well as bikes and pets. Yeah, had her hand up.
I'm Mary Canassis. I'm also a resident of Savin Hill. Just a couple of points of clarification. That makes sense given all the other had. So what happens to some of the service roads that go away in truck on the parkway?
So right now, trucks aren't allowed on
Right.
Morrissey. So at this point, that would have to be a decision in the future as to allow trucks or not. But as of right now, trucks are not allowed on
Are you
Morrissey.
factoring that in your analysis though?
That's a good question for the design.
Casey Harden again for the design team. So the likelihood is the trucks would use the service road and then that would have an entrance into the western development side. And then if they needed to egress, they would use First Street back around to Mount Vernon in all likelihood.
And all of this redesign of the boulevard, how do we do enforcement though? Because we know people don't go 35 miles an hour. If it's open season, you know, they just blow through you. And if you're walking in front of South Line, we no longer have the strip. Sidewalks have been great. I appreciate the fact that summer a lot was done. We still have to have some of the tactile pads put on the crosswalks, but in front of South Line, it's just concrete. It's not pervious. And you feel like you're walking in the breakdown lane on Route 3 going to Cape Cod. I mean, should I face the traffic that might hit me or should I have them to my back so I don't see it when I get hit? I don't know. That's always my 50-50 toss up. But so that's something to think about. Again, trucks and what you're putting on the roads. We have lanes now, which I think is great. Slow down the motorists. And then just another point of clarification, and I'll stop. It's Freeport Street. So traffic is going to be more on Freeport Street if it's a right turn to get across the boulevard. Right now, you have the Toyota dealership and they have parking on the backside of their building. And it's very congested now. So how did you factor in additional cars coming through Freeport Street to go northbound if you're coming south initially or to get over to Freeport Street to go into other parts of Newark? Thank you.
So just to sort of peel off a few of your questions that I can answer before I turn it over to the design folks. So as far as sort of the speeding on the roadway, and as Mike noted, design speed is something that's, while we conceptually look at it, it is much more determined in the project development process. So that's where we would hope to keep speeds a little lower so that it could be a safer environment. But also the lane reconfiguration. So dropping some of the lanes, the extra lanes, really, people feel like it's a speedway. So bringing the cross section down, as well as bringing the active modes closer to those vehicular lanes. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but it makes people more aware that there are active modes around them, and studies show that it does reduce speeds. So the sort of the association of the vehicles with the active modes, as well as the reduced cross section and design speed, that in theory will sort of slow people down and hopefully provide a safer environment, both for drivers and all active modes.
Stop intermittently. Is that something that could be done with that turn set of lights that's pedestrian now that we're talking about pavement?
So, yeah. So the question was similar to 3A in Quincy Shore Drive. Apologies, in Wallaston. Can the lights be not coordinated or timed such that people have to stop as opposed to have free flow? So again, that's a decision for the future. Generally, they coordinate signals. It's meant to allow progression, but not necessarily encourage speeding. So there are the progression of coordination is meant to. So that is a design decision. We typically don't misalign timing on the MassDOT side. So, but again, that's something in project development that can be part of public feedback.
Just one other minor thing to add on that. Oftentimes we will have a signal phase overnight that may have the signal rest. It's called rest on red, where it will be red all the time until someone drives up to it and cues the detection. So on corridors where that's a concern, we do this a lot in like Main Street downtowns late at night, where the roads, signal's designed for the peak hour, but it lets the signal kind of rest in that red setting.
Pausing to see if we have anybody online that would like to live chat. We've taken a few questions in person. We want to be respectful of those on the Zoom call.
Yeah, we have a few. quite difficult to see at the U-turn by Divine Rink. Will mirrors be added? The U-turn by the Stop and Shop actually has better visibility. That's Heidi.
Jay, you said that too fast. Can you, I couldn't hear it.
Oh, sorry. It's quite difficult to see at the U-turn by the Divine Rink. Will mirrors be added? U-turn by the Stop and Shop actually has better visibility.
Yeah. Mirrors, that's a design treatment. Yeah. Oh, is this actually speaking to existing conditions versus a future design? This is speaking to existing conditions. Okay. We can certainly talk to our partners at DCR, and that is a DCR facility at this point. So
another question also by Heidi is, in the short term, can the pedestrian crossings by Moakley Park be illuminated? It's hard to see pedestrians crossing at night.
Okay, we can certainly talk to DCR on that as well, because we had heard we've heard from the public as well that the Preble needs some additional pedestrian lighting as well. So again, this is part of our process to hear anything that we could potentially do and with a maintenance contract or even on a shorter term basis, immediate improvements. So thank you.
We also have a question from Maria Alliance. So she's online. She raised her hand. Can you unmute?
If you could unmute Maria. Maria, can you hear you? Hold on. Why don't we shift to an in-person while we figure out the live chat side? This gentleman here in the middle also. We have quite a few hands, so we'll get to everybody.
Hello, Wally Pozak, Dorchester resident. Question I have, Morrissey Boulevard right now is 35 miles an hour. Right at the globe there, when the light changes, like Daytona,
Understood.
so that light changes, everybody flies. Let's say police are not hiding, they're in the parking lot, Malibu Beach. Then they grab them. On the other side, when they're in Cabin Hill, grab them coming over the bridge, fly. The other question I have is, going from 3 lanes to 2 lanes, how is that going to alleviate the traffic congestion at 3, 4, 5 o'clock when everybody's trying to get home when they're going south? It's crazy going from 3 lanes to 2 lanes. Worse, backing up.
So, the sort of the idea behind the reduction of lanes and how it might actually improve, or that right now with all that extra capacity, drivers understand that in order to bypass, they can use that as I think it's Daytona. I think he's referred to it as. So by reducing the cross section, in theory, that will be less desirable for people that are just trying to get above and below the corridor, that are either destined for the corridor or somewhat local trips, like they live in the corridor and they want to go north or south. So the idea behind it is that it's meant to sort of remove some of the pass-through traffic. And so, and also the redesign is meant to modernize the intersection treatment. So right now, as we know, a lot of them have been retrofitted over the years. So the idea behind it is between reducing the cross section, removing some of those people that are just trying to pass through the corridor, modernizing everything, that it will flow better. And
that's the expressway in 1953. It was supposed to stop all congestion. Right now, you up there, that expressway, unbelievable. So how is it going to alleviate one way or the other way? Even when you get to Braintree, getting on Route 3, they didn't want to have it. They talked about sprawl. They didn't want to widen Route 3. How bad it is up there. When they had a big $1 million plan, all they did is they put new barriers going down Route 3. Down to Kingston, they figured when they got the railroad down there, that's going to alleviate. That didn't do a thing for them.
As progressive planners, we certainly encourage use of rapid transit system, commuter rail, active modes. And so your point is taken that there's a lot of cars out there on 93, and we as planners encourage people to take alternate modes and to get off the highways. So.
Okay, thank you.
I think we're going to go to Maria. I think she's unmuted now. Or she will be in a sec. Okay, she's good. Maria?
Hi, Maria.
Hello, thank you. Hello?
Hello, we can hear
Hello.
you.
Okay, great. I live in Port Norfolk and I'm really worried about how this plan is going to affect the Port Norfolk neighborhood. Just cutting down the lanes for one thing, is going to back it up, and we have a hard time getting it in and out as it now. I'm really worried, especially about the Neponset Circle. You may be alleviating traffic on the Quincy Bridge, but you're going to cause a huge backup on the other side. And not only is that going to make it harder for us to get in and out, it's also going to make it harder for emergency vehicles to get in. And again, it's hard enough as it is. Somebody mentioned it's easier to turn around at Dunkin' Donuts than it is at the rink, and that's absolutely true. That turnaround at the rink is treacherous. I never go that way. I cannot see the cars coming and they're flying, and you've got to turn your head like 180 degrees. You can't do it. So it is not easier. It's much more difficult. You're basically taking away a lane and saying we're going to put a bike lane in, and I'm all for bike lanes. I'm on the Neponset Greenway Council. Why aren't you using the Neponset Greenway Council and leave the road the way it is? You're taking away all the ramps and lanes that are there to relieve the flow, make it easier to get in and out and move along. You're taking those all away. I can't see how going down to 2 lanes is going to allow traffic to go. You got plenty of room there. You can figure out other ways to have the bikes go down and maybe even a bus lane. But what you're doing is going to make it intolerable to live in our neighborhood and all of Neponset. I'm also worried about your Conley Street. I serve as environmental person for the Port Norfolk Civic Association. You're talking about some kind of retention area or tank on Conley Street. Where is that water going to go? Is it going to be filtered first? We already have a sewage problem at Tinian Beach. We don't need dirty road water as well. That's an area of critical environmental concern. Can those 2 problems be solved with once by linking all the storm drains up to the Mass Water Resource to Deer Island? And then you'll clean up the road and the Tinian Beach at the same time. Can we have that done, please? Let me see. Is there anything else I wanted to say? Again, I'm worried about emergency vehicles getting into our neighborhood. And also, if you insist on doing all this, which basically is overkill, would you please put in an exit entrance at Conley Street so that the people in Port Norfolk can get in and out? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. I just want to note that that's a lot of information and a tall order for us to handle, but ultimately everything that's being said today, all these comments are being incorporated into our public record. So as part of the study, it will be included. And so a lot of that stuff that you mentioned, Maria, was actually related to project development. That's not something that we can handle in the conceptual phase. So point being, all this is documented so that when it does enter, or if it enters into any project development process, these kinds of things are included and coordinated with other projects in the area. Next in person, this gentleman over here, actually.
I'm Tommy. I just live right down the street here, and what he said about the 3 lanes to 2 lanes. You drive around here at all?
I have, yeah.
I drive down here all the time, and I'm doing my bike now to go in town to work because traffic's so bad. It's terrible. Freeport Street's like a parking lot. When I come from I'm working down near Government Center. If I take my car, I get no problem till I get to the State Police Barracks. From the State Police Barracks, take the right, go to Old Colony, go to where I live. It takes almost 45 minutes. Traffic is crazy, man. I've never seen traffic like this ever. I mean, it's just coming out of it. And then you get them stupid lights they put down at Freeport. Get everybody else screwed up. You know, you get people trying to go across to Freeport to go towards the Electric Union Hall. And you get people coming from the other way to take a right, and they're supposed to have a blinking yellow. I've seen at least 4 accidents already there. And it's nuts. You know, I like the project. Go to see my friend John. He's best engineer I've ever worked for. And I've been 20 years since I've worked with that guy. He's a smart man. And there's some good stuff tonight. But, you know, traffic flow is terrible, you know, and going to 2 lanes is gonna be tough. And maybe it'll work, you know, maybe they'll be having flying cars by that time. Who knows? You know? Who knows? Who knows? I tell you, because I'm staying on my bike because traffic's terrible. I came here because I just want to hear what was going on. Thank you. Thanks for everything too.
Thank you. The gentleman over here in the black shirt has had his hand up a few times. I haven't had a chance to call him.
Yeah, hi, Greg Bedrosian from the Dorchester Yacht Club. Just to go back to what John was saying, that current Beach Bridge has 5 openings in it, and right now 2.5 of those open blocked. That includes the main opening in the center, which is just about 3/4 of the block. It's becoming a hazard, but to go back to what he was saying about the tidal flow, that's what's trapping all of that sediment in the bay. And in one of the previous meetings, I presented test results that we had done at our own expense that show that pollution and how bad it is. I think I gave somebody here. They took them to the record, but is any consideration being given to cleaning that bay, to getting that sediment out of there and opening those bridge, the openings in the bridge, even in the meantime, before they build the new bridge? Because it's really becoming a hazard.
It's certainly outside of our scope here with the study, but again, with what we do in our study is we document as much as possible. So we can certainly include that there's a lot of, you know, public feedback that there's the need for dredging or for removal of fill. But again, that's outside of this study scope and MassDOT's purview, but we can certainly document it.
Okay, thank you.
Can I jump in there? It's definitely outside of MassDOT's purview, but is it really outside of the scope of the commission as written in the law to like think comprehensively about the area?
Yeah, I would say it's still outside of our scope to examine water dredging within the Bay Area next to the corridor.
And other things comprehensively?
And other,
I guess my issue is just like when you have a steamroller, when all you have is a steamroller, everything looks like a road, right? And I think the community deserves a lot more than that from reimagining the Morrissey corridor.
Yeah. I mean, to sort of answer your question sort of more in more detail, there are a lot of things out there that could have been pulled into our scope, but the point is we aren't scoped to do looking at dredging in the basin area. So it's outside of our scope because we didn't scope it. You could argue that the legislative language is saying some things, but again, the scope of our work doesn't include that.
So did you define the scope? Define the scope. Yeah.
They did.
Yeah, so here's what happened. MassDOT had a scope. Then the commission came on top of it. And MassDOT's scope was already in process. So MassDOT, working with the city and DCR, has a scope for the roadway and associated improvement. The commission may have additional work that needs to be done, but that work is not part of the MassDOT scope, right? AECom, Howard Stein Hudson, they are traffic engineers, at least the ones that are hired on our scope. Okay, I'm sure. I know AECom does a lot of stuff that's not traffic, but so we had a pre-existing scope that we were working on. Then the commission got laid on top of it, and then we combined our scope with the commission so that everybody here wouldn't have to come to commission meetings and MassDOT meetings, and we'd have one meeting, and the commission could guide the MassDOT scope. But the MassDOT scope has always been about Morrissey Boulevard, not about anything beyond Morrissey Boulevard.
So is it fair to say then that MassDOT scope did not change because of the commission?
Yeah, we had an existing contract. It did not change.
So that's interesting. Gotta just put that out there. I mean, that doesn't seem like it is meeting the commission's goals if the scope was the same before and after.
Maybe, can I just add one thing you suggested about maybe using the dredge for fill? That certainly could be something that be considered as part of a construction of any project. Obviously, there's environmental issues with that that would have to be considered as well. And they might look at that as a cost-saving measure, but it also might not be. So there are means and methods of construction that could be looked at if there is an issue that needs to be solved, and maybe that's a way of doing it, but certainly can't say whether that would be a possibility. And now it is not. That's further on down the road, but certainly, you're bringing it up as an idea. Certainly, as Ethan has said, it'll be documented, and when that comes, that could be considered as an option. The trestle's a whole nother thing, but at least from a dredging standpoint, it's not out of the realm of possibilities, but it would have to be really looked at.
Okay, thank you. You holding the microphone already, sir?
Yeah, great. Thank you. My name is Bill Finn. I am the Vice Governor of Savin Hill Yacht Club. So I'm speaking on behalf of our 350 plus members. Want to thank the commission for all their work and for meeting with us previously, especially Councilor Fitzgerald, Representative Hunt, Senator Collins. Really, the major issue as the abutter and property owner, the only one on the east side of Morrissey, it's our only access in and out. And with all of the conversations around the different options for climate resiliency and the levels changing, the different options have a huge potential impact for our members, for the neighborhood, for everybody who uses that as recreational access to boating in the Boston community. And so I think Chris mentioned having a follow-up meeting. So we would just request to be part of that as it moves forward. But also we had requested, and I see it in the design, to consider the left turn into the club, and we appreciate seeing that in the design. One concern that another neighborhood member brought up is, with no option to have an outlet for a U-turn, does that encourage people to turn into the club to then make a U-turn? So just if that could get looked at, to have maybe more width for a dedicated U-turn lane, so that it's not encouraging, if the intent is for it to be a U-turn, that it's not encouraging people to come onto the property in traffic times to make that turn.
Noted.
And then the other thing that was brought up just about truck traffic, just as it's considered that the only way that we get deliveries is for trucks to go up and down Morrissey Boulevard. So how that would get sort of baked into the consideration for commercial vehicle traffic. Thanks.
Understood. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Doyle and I'm a Savin Hill resident. This is really a process question. I'm just thinking, I know, and I appreciate all the work that you guys have done, people have done in the recent past, but I feel like it would be really helpful if we got the slide deck before the meeting, as opposed, because it's a lot to digest in an hour. I mean, it's a lot of information. There's a lot of questions that come from that slide deck, but it would be really helpful if you could share them with us even the morning of or the day before. And I don't just mean the Savin Hill Civic Association, but Norfolk or whoever, all at McCormick, anybody's going to want to look at that. So that's just a hope of mine that could happen.
Understood. Yeah. Well, apologies. We were really trying to get it online this morning. It may or may not be live right now. I have to check. So apologies. We were trying to get it sooner. I think, as you can see from what we presented, there's a lot of information, a lot of moving parts, apologies. And we always strive to get it sooner. Unfortunately, I think last meeting we got it out there sooner. So we try to. Unfortunately, sometimes we don't. So we will always try our best to get it out sooner. Understood. Yes. Yeah. We generally, as a DOT, we try not to use printed copies, but understanding good public process, people sometimes need the hard copies. So we understand that. So we have to balance use of environmental resources.
Hi, thank you. I'll try to make this quick. My name's Glenn. I live in Savin Hill. And I guess if I just wanted to say only one thing to keep it quick. I personally, and this is not to disregard other people's positive feelings about it too, but the left turn at the Savin Hill Yacht Club that's in there, I think I'll just say for the record, is something that some people have been concerned about, primarily for essentially inserting a U-turn there where there isn't one currently on Morrissey, that would act as a big attractor for traffic from Dorchester Avenue to go down Savin Hill Avenue. People who don't want to go up Dot Ave to go on the interstate north or south, or go down to Freeport Street because it's congested. And that, it was said a few minutes ago, like 9 times out of 10, I don't think someone would take that turn. But I think they would, like, there's plenty of examples all around us in Boston where GPS is going to send you on that route because it's going to look like a shortcut. And especially at peak traffic time, it really might be because there's fewer traffic lights on Savin Hill Avenue rather than having to go up Dot Ave. So if you're a person on Jones Hill or Meeting House Hill or coming from Dudley Street, like any kind of a westward cone from Savin Hill, the GPS is going to tell you it's faster to go that way and take that U-turn. So that's just kind of my concern. I'll say that's the end of it. In terms of like, it's very attractive. I live in Savin Hill too, and I know that like it's nice to think there could be a shortcut there. But I do hope that the VISM or some sort of model really takes into account that kind of impact that could really happen on Savin Hill Ave very realistically, like that 100% of people who are new traffic there are trying to make that U-turn. I just, on the analysis earlier, when we had like the green, gray, and neutral ratings in the chart, I saw that for the median U-turn, it was rated as like a green check mark for disturbance to neighborhood. And that's where something where I think like maybe disturbance of neighborhood isn't being defined correctly there, or it's like we can put this in without construction, but it would have a huge impact on traffic through Savin Hill and create a much more of a cut through effect. So
thank you. Yeah, those are types of comments on our evaluation criteria that we want to hear. Casey had a response.
So we did run a travel demand model because we had the same sort of initial thought. We were trying to be mindful of the fact that Savin Hill U-turn could be an attractor. It didn't. The initial travel demand modeling results did not what I would say pull in a bunch of trips, but it is certainly something that as we continue to track various design elements, to try to discourage the cut through traffic, we need to be mindful of that.
We have some, okay, perfect.
Sorry, thank you. I'm Christine Hogue. I live in Savin Hill, and I know there's been a lot of work, obviously, that's gone into this. So, but at the last meeting that I was at, I stayed after and I mentioned that I just wanted to make sure that everyone's taking into consideration the Dorchester Bay City Project Notification Forum, which indicated at its inception that there would be 50,000 new car trips a day as a result of that project. And as that project progressed, that number increased to 70,000 new car trips a day. We add on to that, Center Court, that's potentially 100,000 new car trips a day just for those developments, not including, as was mentioned, school traffic. And so I'd like to think that that's being taken into consideration as part of this, but it's hard for me to imagine what that will look like for us, because that's cars. That's not taking the bike lane. That's what they projected just for cars and trucks and things like that. So that's my first comment. I don't know if you can answer to that, whatever. But the second one is regarding specifics. I know this is just conceptual process, but at what point will we have a good understanding of what walls and walkways and things like that, the dimensions of those things, so that we can have a better understanding visually of how it will impact our neighborhood?
So I think the most direct answer to your first question is that yes, our future. So the visual simulation earlier, the build condition, and our last presentation from our last meeting, we tried to dive quite a bit deeper into what we call the demographic data, and that really, to your point about trips from Dorchester Bay City, that is really driven by employment or population that lives there. So that would live there. So all of that information is included in, Casey mentioned the regional travel demand model. All of that information is included on a future year basis. And so the numbers, the volumes, the designs, all those are predicated on DBC being in the future built. So as far as the other question, I look to the design team to give a little bit more detail on essentially the final analysis and the looks and the visuals. Just sure. You can provide more detail.
Thanks, Ethan. Casey Harden from the design team. First of all, I want to take back in the presentation when I called it a wall. It's a buried wall. So we have from those profiles, we've now developed relatively detailed geometric models. And so what we're looking to do is for the next meeting to be able to display some of those differences. I know it's really hard to see in a profile view, some different renderings or cross sections that illustrate those relative heights at some different spaces so that it's easier to we recognize the profile as a tough view.
Yeah, and I think, so before I just add to what Casey said, I think that's why the layout has a direct overhead view. We have an oblique rendering We have cross sections because we understand it's not easy to sort of, even I have a sometimes challenging time wrapping my head around what it is we're talking about, what it is we're looking at. So all these visuals together hopefully can paint a better picture, help people wrap their head around it. So I just wanted to add that to what Casey said. We have we're going to transition to online. Sorry, we're going to transition to online just to be fair to virtual and in person.
We have a question from John Lyons. I recall seeing or hearing previously that there was an assumption that 20 to 25% of the traffic at Neponset would migrate onto the expressway. Is there any basis for that assumption other than a road die would make Morrissey a less desirable route for through traffic? The on-ramp at Neponset now frequently backs up through the circle and onto the Neponset River Bridge. Is there any example of where a similar proposed road diet has actually made the traffic flow better?
So I guess maybe to take the second one, we could potentially look into examples of road diets and how it improves. Excuse me. Okay, could you repeat the beginning of the first question of the first part of the question real quick?
20 to 25% of the traffic would be diverted.
So
that's how you would solve the.
Yeah. So this is back to the regional travel demand model. We didn't just guess, so to speak. The model takes into a number of factors into consideration. There's trip, without getting too technical and wonky. There's trip distribution. There's trip generation, distribution, assignment. So all this stuff within the model, basically 25% was reassigned over to I-93, and that is based on what's called a gravity model. There's expectations of what drivers will do based on the time it would take to go through certain corridors. So it's extremely it's an algorithm. There's all kinds of stuff going on, but the model basically says that a lot of people will shift over to 93, and we've heard 93 is packed, but for years 93 gets peak spreading as well. So I think that shift to 93 probably would involve more peak spreading. So that's sort of the answer to those two questions. Another online, Jay?
The recurring proposal, this is from John Lyons again, to make the Neponset Avenue Expressway underpass two-way. The 4 available lanes are typically filled at every light cycle. What percentage of traffic inbound on Gallivan or on the bridge from Quincy has a destination of Neponset Avenue? That's a Mike you can ask.
Mike, do you have that detail right now?
I don't have those numbers handy right now, but yes, we are kind of reallocating those 4 lanes, the 2 eastbound, 2 westbound, and making the signals at each side more efficient. Also, just to talk about the 20-25% less at Neponset Circle, there's actually less of a change at Neponset Circle itself because it's the end of our corridor. So it's still a challenging location, and yes, our modeling does show the 93 on-ramp will still back up. So from an improvement point of view, we're not improving 93 as part of this. That will still be a challenge, but we're better accommodating the traffic through the circle, and we're taking those movements out of the circle itself, putting it under 93 so that overall reduces delay and reduces the number of vehicles going circle. So I hope that answers the question somewhat. Sorry, I don't have the exact volume down for Gallivan and Onset westbound.
We'll take one more. From Heidi Mosinger, can it be clarified why the U-turn at the Dunkin' Stop and Shop is being eliminated while the U-turn at Divine that is demonstratedly unsafe is being kept? Why are you eliminating a U-turn at Dunkin'?
Casey Harden from the design team. I mean, I think the crash experience at near Pope's Hill is showing that the weaving in that very short distance creates an absolute problem. I don't dispute anyone that's saying it may be difficult to look at the other one, but I think just in reviewing the crash statistics, that's more of a problem.
Thank you. Evan, runner.
can we revisit First Street again, please? This is Selena, neighbor. So throughout this whole project, the point is to reduce traffic, make this smoother, everything, increase pedestrian safety, increase use of the MBTA. First Street has two dead ends. One is going into a quote unquote future development who I don't know who got their back scratched to create that road there, but there's no development there. So I don't know why there's a road plan. And the second one goes into BC High, which is also not a road. So why do we even need a First Street? In our last meeting, I believe it was Frank who called in and said, the problem with we need to make more connections through this community, which is this school that we're in, because we're separated by 93 and there's no access to Star Market or the parks or the beaches from this part of Dorchester. Why aren't we planning for the current connections and we're planning for a future connection, which from years ago when this development was planned, it was said to be a commuter development right next to JFK. The reason for it was everyone was going to be commuting. Now we're putting in 4 car lanes and 4 bike lanes, and we're creating access to a development that is currently not there. Do we really need those 2 extra sections of First Street?
So the reason this is included is because we do have again, consistency with other plans. If earlier in the presentation, we try to incorporate as much as we can. So there was a plan we understood in the past. And so not considering it also wouldn't be good planning practice. So this is a consideration of prior plans. Now, as far as to sort of existing and future, we as planners, as transportation planners, generally, we like to consider both access to existing and any access to future development, because if you don't consider it in the future, it may be more difficult to provide that access. So, and so
Right, but
this
to be
isn't
clear,
all.
that
Sorry.
plan we're talking about now is not our plan.
No.
Okay. But the plans we are being coordinating with are things like Plan Dorchester and other plans. Okay. So this sort of goes to the other point about what this study is opposed to what the commission is supposed to be looking at, right? MassDOT would never be the people who would come in and plan comprehensive development. The city does that. The city does that, I think, really well. Okay, but they do that. We don't do that. But there is there are plans that have First Street as a future plan part of this community, that because we are planning for Morrissey, we have to take into account.
So I just want to clarify though, MassDOT chairs the commission, right?
Yep.
So as the chair of the commission, like, I don't think it's so easy to separate MassDOT from the commission.
No, again, the point I'm trying to stress is, I don't think maybe I'm wrong. I don't think anybody thinks that MassDOT come in Dorchester and plan comprehensive development in Dorchester. That's not our role. That's not what we're good at. I don't think that would be taken well. That is the city's responsibility. And again, I think the city does it really well. But we take what the city has done and are doing and meld them into our plan.
So I agree it's not for Dorchester, but in the law that created the commission, MassDOT, as the chair of the commission, is tasked with creating a comprehensive plan for the Morrissey corridor, which is what we're talking about now, and includes First Street. So, it's unfortunate, but MassDOT has been, there haven't been other presentations from other parts of the commission because MassDOT, I don't think, has encouraged it. I don't know why, but it doesn't meet the comprehensive planning nature of what's asked for in the law and what really Selena's getting at here.
And sort of,
right.
We
So,
also
wait.
Sorry.
So I need help from the city now.
Yeah,
okay?
no,
Wait. I really need you guys to step up here, because if the city is on this commission, okay, MassDOT would never come in and tell the city that their plans are wrong. Okay, if the community wants to tell the city that their plans are wrong, that's, that's between you guys, okay? Okay, we would never come in here and tell the city their plans are wrong. We take what the city has done and we make our plans accommodate what the city has done. That's, I don't know how else to do this. We're not going to overrule the city's local planning. They've done their local planning. They have a plan that says First Street is going to be a future connection. We have to take that into account.
Yep. Again, Jim Fitzgerald with the planning department. And just to clarify, I think it's a timing problem, and we should be showing that graphic with that future context of Dorchester Bay City site plan. So let's say Morrissey Boulevard gets constructed in 5 years. And if Dorchester Bay City, that project hasn't advanced enough to build that street, it will have to be something that gets built by them later, right? So I think it's a bit of a timing problem about realizing it, but it's also hard to visualize it. I think to your point, going into existing conditions that don't make sense today with this plan. So that's probably something we need to make clear on. And that absolutely where that lands, I know it's showing it probably in not the exact right location, but it's meant to be in the location where Dorchester Bay City anticipates them building that street, First Street, from Morrissey out to Mount Vernon. And that's a critical part of that development plan. I hope that clarifies. So that's very much a future thing. It's going to be something where maybe Dorchester Bay City, when they're finishing their build out, that they are responsible for building the actual signal. So there could be an interim condition where that street doesn't exist. If Morrissey Boulevard, I'd love for it to move as fast as possible. It gets built long before Dorchester Bay City is advancing with the development far enough that, yeah, maybe Dorchester Bay City then is responsible for actually adding the signal at that time when they're ready to complete that connection. So hopefully that there.
This gentleman in the middle with the maroon button down.
Bill Lannis from Uplands Corner. I was just wondering if it's possible for you to provide us kind of with the numbers that you're assuming for the traffic, the inputs to your traffic analysis. I mean, it seems like we're kind of, we've stretched the schedule quite a bit here. And you're talking about one more meeting and then coming up with the final result. But so we're putting a lot of pressure on one more meeting, and all the details are going to come together at this one meeting, and it seems like it'd be helpful to try to get some more of this information out sooner.
So certainly we can try to get more information out. I think we had in some of our prior decks, we had some information related to the demographic data. I think some earlier ones may have had some volume stuff, but we can certainly provide more. Also, to be clear, we have 2 more meetings. Just want you to know, next one is not the last one. We have 2 more. We have an October meeting planned and a November meeting. So there is, whether or not you consider that more time, I just want to be clear, there are 2, it's not just 1. So next meeting, we're going to try to show more detail, and so noted volume information be helpful. But then there will be another meeting as well. So it's not, next one's not last chance, I guess is what I should say. We're going to take online? Oh, in person? So it's great. Either way.
Hi, Marta Carney, Savin Hill, lifelong, born and raised here. So I'm trying to be positive. We have a balance between, improving this road. It needs to be done, right? So we need a balance of moving the cars through, but also for our community. So I'm in favor of the 2 lanes. I know a lot of you don't agree with it, but we need to get this done, and just please keep listening to us. John Rich, the yacht clubs, the water. We're home to 5 yacht clubs in Dorchester. So, UMass came along and UMass got built. And so we lost a lot of the water, right? At low mean tides, it's mud out there. The whole place needs to be dredged, So just listen to us. One thing I do disagree with the gentleman that spoke about the turnaround. So I really am in favor of the turnaround out of Old Colony Terrace, because I feel like the Jones Hill and all them, they're not going to just cut through Savin Hill over the bridge and then go down and then to go back where they came from. So I kind of, neighbors, we love that. The little turnaround, we come out of Savin Hill and we get to go, off Dot F. So I strongly disagree with that. But anyway, thank you. Keep listening. I know Chris in the past, Chris Osgood, you know, we talked about, you know, it's not the street. A lot of it's the timing, the progression, the fast, the slow. And we get bogged down with all these 50,000 cars, but traffic is only 3 to 6, right? 7 to 9 in the morning. Like, so we're going crazy. We're not going to have hundreds of cars there. It's just the pressure points, you know, at, you know, busy times. So anyway, thanks for listening to us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Like we're shifting to online. Yeah, it looks like we have a no.
All right, we're good.
Hey, thanks for letting me jump in again. I forgot just for the, and you know, I totally appreciate the idea of the turnaround too. So I was going to say, I totally forgot to say something in my earlier comment, which was to ask if the commission did study essentially having that turnaround, but not having it so quickly after, you know, turning off Old Colony there. Like, is there room? There's a breakdown lane that's in front of Carson Beach parking lot. Like, is that location enough room to reconfigure so that the turnaround happens there? Like, if it's just a little farther down, it makes it less attractive other than to people in the neighborhood. And there may be that room to play with there. And then it also means if people are cutting through to make that left, then there's a lot more time to execute that lane change without it sort of having to instantly cut off traffic. So it's kind of like either there, the breakdown lane in front of Malibu Beach, or, you know, it might be too late, but essentially like everyone now has to U-turn at Freeport Street, like underneath the overpass there. The median's pretty thick there in the drawings. Like, is there some spot 1,000 feet back from that intersection where there's enough room to put that U-turn there? So it essentially preserves the status quo of like turning around under the underpass, but past the on-ramp. Anyways, I sort of forgot to ask if that could be, if there was ever room to consider that or like put that in.
I don't know if Casey can answer now, but we can certainly look at it if he doesn't know.
It was mostly that. I mean, to my knowledge, I don't think that was a thing that was studied intensively during the DCR phase. It's not something we've looked at. It's an interesting idea. I think we'd be happy to take a look. I'm a little concerned that the median is not wide enough to generate the turning radii, but we'll look. It's an interesting idea.
I think we are all set with in-person comments. No. So I'm going to turn it back over to David as the chair.
So do we have a meeting, a time for our next meeting yet?
We do not. We are looking in late October, obviously.
Yeah. But so we've heard today how really important it is that we get stuff out quicker in advance of the meetings. We will take that into consideration as we set our next meeting. Not just from the general public, but from the commission members themselves. They got the deck this morning, I think. So we will take that into consideration. We will try to get as much information out as we can as early as possible. I think we might schedule the meeting to be run a bit longer because we always run over. And we don't want anybody to feel like they didn't get the chance to make their comments or to be heard. But we will let you know as soon as we know when the next meeting is. And thank you all very much. We always appreciate all your comments.
Thank you. Good night.